Hi there. So, my topic was discrimination among Asian Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. And like I said, that is my proposed problem. So, that discusses also the current trends among society, such as you can see, hateful language, vandalism, profanity, and altered views in general, and social constructs that society has created due to the pandemic. So, with that, I looked into some literature reviews. So, the first, I went into the Obesity Society. And so, this offered a great picture into how discrimination has, occurred during the pandemic in multiple individuals and different characteristics. And so, I looked into this one. And they did research on BMI and weight discrimination, and then the psychological, behavioral, and interpersonal responses during the pandemic. So this was an online questionnaire in February of last year. And so this overall determined that weight discrimination had occurred and negative stigmas increased during the pandemic of those that struggle with obesity. And this also included being treated unfairly, threats, microaggressions, rejection, loneliness, etc. And so this offered a good picture into what discrimination looks like as a whole due to the coronavirus. I also looked into Frontiers of Public Health. So this was a study done analyzing media coverage during the outbreak involving the pandemic with stigmatization. And so this was media coverage such as government officials, administration bodies, newspapers, online outlets, and even hospitals. And they even cited that many articles highlighted stigma of an infected patient or close contact of the patient belonging to a particular race, religion, or social class. So essentially, they really emphasized how inaccurate information has accrued negative stigmas of individuals because of the media directly. I also looked into the Health Services Research Center. So they did a telephone survey in 2017. So this was definitely before the pandemic, but it also offered a great picture into what discrimination was like for the Asian American population beforehand. Again, there's lots of limitations in this, especially with it being a phone survey, because not everyone has access to phones. But again, it definitely discusses how discrimination occurred before the pandemic, which ultimately showed me that throughout the other literature reviews that the discrimination has definitely risen during the pandemic. And so I then looked at Pew Research Center, and they did research on Black and Asian Americans and their levels of discrimination during the pandemic that they reported. So obviously I looked more into the Asian American population, and this was done through an online survey of about 9,600 participants. And they found that 4 in 10 adults have expressed racist views of Asian Americans during the pandemic. So this has been through slurs, jokes, threats, etc. And they also reported that 39% of Americans felt uncomfortable around Asians, that 31% had used slurred jokes, and 26% of Asian Americans, had feared being hurt or had, just general fear of others in the population. And so there's obviously limitations to this study as well, but it did offer a good picture of both Black and Asian American discrimination during the I also look into APA PsycNet, which I found to be the most helpful. And so this discussed a sample of about 400 Asian Americans in the US, and this was self-reported. It was through an online platform, and participants also got paid. And they also had the choice to include personal testimony. So this personal testimony was, an option that they could have. And there was reports of people moving to other subway cars, even though there were plenty of space, that they do not trust Asians because the virus came from China, or even calling it the Chinese virus. So obviously this affects the biopsychosocial self, and you can see in the numbers that there's increases in discrimination, anxiety, depression, and even physical health. And in the graph that they reported, On the right, you can see the rise in discrimination, but also depressive symptoms for those of high and low social supports, which is definitely something to note during the pandemic, and how much these have increased for Asian Americans. Now, with that, I presented the theory, the labeling theory, by Howard Becker. And so this analyzes how social groups create and apply definitions for deviant behavior and explains the attachment of labels. And so, as you can see here, due to the conditions of the pandemic, and even the discussion around Asian countries and Asian Americans as a whole, regarding where the source of the virus had come from, this allowed for labeling to occur, deviant labeling. And the labeling theory also discusses the power that social groups have to impose those labels. So this can be done, as the article previously suggested, through media, through celebrities, through politicians, government officials. And this overall created negative reactions, like labeling and stereotyping, negative stigmas, microaggressions, etc. Now, with my proposed research, I wanted to find how discrimination and oppression has changed for Asian Americans from the pandemic directly. And so, through my proposal, it would be to measure a smaller sample size in each specific state in the United States, since every single area, goes through things very differently, because it's different groups of people. And I'd want this to be randomized to ensure a heterogeneity of gender, age, and class. And then following the survey, it would be a qualitative interview to kind of dive deeper into what those answers really look like. And so my hypothesis would be an increase in discrimination and oppression in Asian Americans throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. So limitations and discussions to this, due to personal experiences, participants may and would feel uncomfortable to express those. So that would be, could be resolved through building rapport with the participant, having more of a conversation style interview versus, one that holds a lot of power. This would be very time consuming. So again, this is a limitation. And there's also limitations on ensuring, heterogeneity. So this requires careful implementation to avoid gaps in the class, ages, and genders. And this is a time cost, and this is also a financial cost. So these are both limitations to the study. But overall, what the study could benefit would be similar to the APA PsycNet, where you could see the experiences before the pandemic, during, and even after. With specific experiences, how they experienced it, why they may have experienced it. And then through the use of the interviewing afterwards, you could see more of a qualitative aspect of it, to see more in depth of their experiences. And I think that would definitely benefit to see how it really changed. And as a sociology student, as if, those that are future sociologists, I think that this proposed study, but then also the literature reviews, and the theory itself offers a great insight into how the COVID-19 pandemic really changed social constructs, but also social thinking, and how people create stigmatizations and oppression and discrimination, and how this really forms. So this was a great learning process to see how it was created and how society really evolves with it. And I'm curious to see how it continues to evolve as the pandemic hopefully comes to a close.